Many of the people that I coach struggle with relationships. Perhaps they don't feel worthy of a relationship and they hold back from building great new connections. Or perhaps they don't trust other people, imagining that their heart will be broken again, or that somehow they will be betrayed by a new close friend. Today I want to talk a little bit about attachment styles. If you've heard of attachment styles, it's a very basic concept that helps you understand how you see the world and how you see yourself, and it dictates how you will connect or struggle to connect with other people. This graph that you're seeing in front of you is a general concept of the way that human beings are thought to do attachment styles. You can see here two axes. One axis, the horizontal axis, is how you see yourself. At the left end of the spectrum here is a positive view of yourself. I'll put a big plus there. At the right hand side of the spectrum is a negative view of yourself. The vertical axis is how you see others. Positive view of others is at the top. Basically means you generally trust other people, you generally like other people, you generally feel comfortable around other people. At the bottom here, you would have a negative view and find yourself avoiding other people, or at least not getting too close. Now this model seems very, very simplistic, but I learned a lot of things by looking at it and reflecting on my own life. I'm going to use myself as an example here, but I encourage you to do an exercise very much like this to understand how your own attachment styles have formed and have developed over time based on your life experiences. It may help you understand where you got to wherever you are now on this graph. It will also help you understand how you can move where you are on this graph if that's something that you want to do. So first of all, let's look at the different categories that are represented here. You can see here the most positive category is in this top left corner. I'm going to draw a little X here. This is referred to as a secure attachment style. This is when you feel quite good about yourself as a person. You feel that you bring value to social situations. You like yourself. You feel worthy of good connections and relationships. And you trust others as well. So you feel comfortable by yourself and you feel comfortable in intimate situations. Top right of the graph is a little different. You have a positive view of others, but not as positive a view of yourself. You're a little bit fearful of rejection. You're possibly fearful of imposter syndrome, that you'll somehow be found out as a pretender, that you aren't really as worthwhile as you want. This is a common problem for people who suffer from nice guy syndrome. And this is referred to as preoccupied. Basically, it means you'll go out into public situations and you feel comfortable about the other people, but you don't feel comfortable being yourself in front of them. In the lower left corner is a dismissive or dismissing attachment style. There's a little X there. And this basically means that you like yourself quite a bit. You feel very confident in yourself, but you do not trust others. And this can be very contextually sensitive. As an example, if you had a very, very attractive Asian girlfriend and she broke your heart, you may find yourself distrustful of attractive Asian women. It can be very, very contextually sensitive, and it's important to understand that your attachment styles on this map overall can be thought of as you and society, or they can be thought of in more narrow contexts, you and close friends, you and your workmates, you and your family, you and your romantic partner, you and people in society. So keep that in mind when you're considering the path that you've taken. In this situation, if you have a dismissive attachment style, it basically means that you feel happy to be around people, but you do not trust people enough to let them close. This is a very closed off personality who is a bit overprotective of themselves from others. And I have actually encountered a lot of people like this, particularly women who get hit on much too often from guys tend to shut out all guys initially as being potentially a threat. In the bottom right corner is the least comfortable and least happy place to be. It is negative on both scales, and it is referred to as the fearful attachment style. Putting a little X there now so you know where I am. In the fearful attachment style, you don't trust other people and you don't like yourself. This is commonly something that you'll see in people that don't want to leave home, that have no friends, that have no social life. They'll go to work, they'll work hard, they'll feel bad about themselves, they come home, they don't go out and meet new people. And most of us have experienced some degree of this at some point in our lives. In fact, most of us have experienced some degree of all of these different attachment styles at some point in our life. The key thing I want you to understand, though, is that your attachment style changes over time. My personal view on this is that all of us, when we are born, start about here in a slightly secure attachment style area. We've got no reason to think badly of ourselves. We barely have a sense of self. When it comes to others, they are a brand new thing in our world as well. We've got no reason to distrust others, and there are certain chemicals already in our system and in our brain, such as serotonin and oxytocin, which connect us very strongly with our parents, particularly mom. And in that situation, we feel positively towards other people. We rely on them for our survival as an infant. So as a result, we're not running and screaming and crawling away from our mothers, or we would all have starved a long time ago. On the other hand, we don't really have a context. We don't really have an understanding on how to process strangers. There's a bit of indifference or uncertainty around those situations. Now, if things stayed in that category indefinitely, and for some people who have led very, very protected lives, they may have stayed in a secure attachment style and may have even become more secure over time as they developed. For most of us, life circumstances will shift us into these different quadrants. I'm going to take a guess at the events of my life and see if I can draw out a picture of what I remember experiencing and even when. And I encourage you again to do this exercise for yourself on a piece of paper and see what you can learn about yourself. As I was born, happy child, enjoyed my family, parents, everything good. But at a very young age, my parents separated. And it was as a result of strong emotional differences between my parents. My parents are both great people. I love them dearly. But my father had a very difficult time dealing with anger, and it resulted in some very, very severe outbursts that ended up driving them apart, including physical violence. Now, I say that only because it impressed on me the sense that people could be dangerous when they lost control. So essentially what this meant was I felt fine about myself. I didn't have a part in this. My view of myself wasn't affected. But my view of others suddenly shifted to where I realized that people could be dangerous in certain contexts. And I would say that on average, that created a kind of suspicion. My sense of others shifted to where, by default, I felt like I couldn't really trust other people automatically. They had to prove that they were safe to me. So I moved into a more dismissive area. Now I notice even now that this affected my childhood. It was at about that point from 4 years old, which is an important developmental age, that I began doing more things by myself. I began playing by myself more. I began exploring the world by myself more. I was a very curious and creative child. I liked to climb trees. But rather than hanging around with friends or making friends or joining sports groups, I just felt more comfortable by myself. And I couldn't have told you why. It wasn't a clear sense of distrust, but there was a vague sense of, I don't really know these people. That feels uncomfortable for some reason. I'd have just as much fun going into the forest by myself, climbing a tree by myself, building Legos by myself, playing a game by myself. Why take that unnecessary perceived added risk? I couldn't see an upside. I didn't feel a draw towards others because there was a risk associated with that in my mind. And that included my own brothers and sisters, people that hang around me closest. It wasn't that I really didn't trust them, it was just, it felt like an added complication and there were too many question marks. And I just ended up playing by myself as a default behavior. From age 4 until sometime, I'm going to fast forward all the way to, say, teenagerhood, which was the next big social context change I can imagine. Now, at this point, sex drive began to enter the picture. Testosterone starts to develop, my body's developing, puberty hits. Now, I want to be able to connect, but I feel very uncomfortable connecting, partly because I'm in this dismissive space in my relationship and my attachment styles, and partly because I've been there so long that I now felt socially unskilled. And that did an interesting thing that essentially made me feel like I lacked something. And I began to move in this direction. And I actually went, I'm going to say, fairly far. On top of all the other issues, sorry for my poor penmanship here, on top of all the other issues of puberty and the complications of high school relationships and politics and groups to begin with, was a sense that I didn't know how to navigate that. I didn't know who to trust. I didn't know who to build relationships with. I didn't know how to build relationships with them. And that created this kind of anxiety. And as I felt this anxiety, I also imagined that I was more likely to be rejected, so I trusted other people less. So I began shifting down further as well and got into a fairly negative space, which I would not describe it as depression per se. It was definitely quite depressive though. At that point, I realized I did not like being in this space. I did not want to be in this space. And this is a very, very fundamental aspect of our mammal brain. It wants to connect. If your serotonin gets low, you will start to feel anxious. You will start to feel like you need to connect. It will start to push you to do better. And as a result, I developed the resolve that I wanted to be better at relationships. And I would carefully pick a few key friends. And I also began directly confronting my fear of social anxiety. I did that in a couple different ways. I joined a radio station so that I would have to talk on the air. I joined the speech and debate club so I would actually have to get comfortable with anger and confrontations, which, as you remember here, was one of the very, very significant aspects of my life, was my reaction to anger and fear and confrontation. So I began basically training myself and challenging my socially anxious mindset, my fearful attachment style. And it did have some positive effect. I would say I began to trust others quite a bit more, and I began to like myself a little bit more as I saw myself making progress and I saw other people, if not accepting me, at least they weren't rejecting me. So this was a slightly better space, but I didn't make very, very significant headway for many, many years later. I ended up getting married at 19, 20 years old, very young. At that point, I felt pretty comfortable with other people, and I felt pretty comfortable with myself. I, at that same time, had started my first business, which was just going crazy well, and everybody was really patting me on the back. Good job, Mike. Congratulations on your first $5 million. I was really happy with where my life was and who I was and how things were going. And I'd say I ended up probably here through hard work and sweat and the victories that I saw in building the life that I wanted. Now, this wasn't really self-development in the sense of working on my own psychology. It was a result of the circumstances around me. Success, victory, people showing me, giving me compliments was made me feel good, made me feel safe, made me feel more secure. 26 years old, went through a terrible divorce, absolutely terrible breakup situation, and I immediately did not trust people at all again. Skyrocketed down to here. I'm going to say this is specifically women. I was like, holy crap, women can do that and do that to me. That was horrible. I didn't trust women. This is not specific to all people. So if I wanted to draw this as how I felt about people in general, it was somewhere in this area of I don't really trust most. There are a few I trust a little bit. So a couple people were in this space up at the top. Things start to get messy on our diagram at this point. It took me some time from there, because I no longer had a relationship and was suspicious about relationships and didn't understand why things had gone so wrong and couldn't explain what I could have done differently and felt as though I had been rejected in some kind of terrible way. I probably moved back into the fearful attachment style as well, I would say somewhere around here. From there, formed another relationship with a very nice young lady who was much more values aligned with me. Moved back into trusting people and mostly liking myself. I ended up somewhere around here. Looks like one of those football diagrams in American football. At that point, my life pretty much stayed the same for the next 10 years or so, probably longer, 15 years plus. And I was mostly happy. I was happy with myself, and I was happy with the few friends that I had. I was happy having a small, close group of people, and I identified as an introvert. I just wasn't a big social guy. I didn't like parties. I didn't really like strangers, but I could interact with them when it was necessary, no problem. And this space was comfortable enough. I could work well. I could build my business well. My life was comfortable enough. I did feel a lack of confidence when it came to certain social situations. I would never want to get on stage. I wouldn't want to walk up to a complete stranger and say hello without a really good reason. I was very uncomfortable at parties where there were a lot of people to talk to, and I didn't really know how to behave around all these different people. And it wasn't until some time later that I got sick of that situation again and really decided I really wanted to be here in this upper left corner and began a concerted effort. This is when self-development really began for me. And I really wanted to navigate myself from this space here all the way up until I felt a place where I knew who to trust, I knew how to trust people, I knew how to be fine with other people being other people, and with the fact that rejection is not going to hurt me, and I wanted to really like myself. Now this path took me about total, up to today, about 6 years of concerted effort. I've been working on my psychology and my mindset, my social skills, building the life that I want, that I love. So there are two components that I'm really aware of that finally brought me up to this top left quadrant where I really wanted to be. The first was the vertical shift of trusting other people. I really had to get out of my shell and be as social as possible. I really need to put myself in situations where I felt as though I could be rejected, and I had to see what rejection would feel like and see how it would affect me. I found more and more and more that people love to connect if you're honest and you're authentic and you show people respect and kindness and interest and appreciation. We are, after all mammals. We need each other. We're designed to need each other. And yet we tend to forget that. With our human mind, we tend to put up all sorts of rules and barriers and limitations and restrictions around how relationships work and how they form. You look at two dogs meet on the street, they don't have complicated protocols for whether or not they want to become friends. They greet each other, they pretty much sniff each other's butts, and then they know straight away whether or not they're going to get along or not. It's pretty simple. And most of our brain, 250 million years of evolution of our mammal brain, is wired for that. It's only the last 50,000 years of our neocortex development that we began to form rules and contracts and social situations around how those develop. So I simply had to let go of a lot of that. Put myself in those situations regularly, move into a heavily populated area, and just keep meeting people every day. And I noticed that fear went away quickly. Pretty soon, I began to trust other people, or at least trust that if I met someone who wasn't good for me, I'd be able to identify that quickly and easily just uninvite them from my life. No problem. Very easy to do. The second thing I needed to do was to like myself more. The way I developed my appreciation for myself was by building a lifestyle that I really, really approved of. At Brojo, we talk about core values quite a bit. For me, that was essentially my compass to building exactly the life that I want that fits me best. My life 7, 8 years ago was centered on work with very little else. There was no attention to health or fitness. There was very little attention to friends, even very little attention to family, no attention to what I really wanted out of life as a big picture or what I wanted to leave behind as a legacy after I'm gone. I had very little life mission at all, and I knew nothing about psychology. For me, success was about work. It was about achieving at work, making money, completing projects, and just continuing. But I found that very lacking and very limiting. And when I began to understand my values and pursue them, I noticed that I began to shift leftward along this axis where I really began to like myself. Began going to the gym regularly, joined a Japanese taiko drumming group, began performing on stage, began confronting my fears and social anxiety, began developing new friends, started some martial arts, started psychology and self-development, started creating social groups where other people who had social anxiety could come and make friends. Started all of these different things, and pretty soon I found that when I looked in the mirror, I felt really, really good about the guy that was looking back at me. And that allowed me to shift my perception of myself from a very, very neutral one to a very positive one. By doing both of those things together over a 6-year period, I was able to progress myself from a relatively unhappy, very unsatisfying existence day to day to a place where I am now very enthusiastic about getting out of bed, moving forwards towards my goals. I have goals now. I know what I'm working towards. I know what I want. I can see my progress happening week after week, month after month. And it's a very, very enjoyable space to be. Now, that is a picture of my life, sort of mapped out a bit over time. And you can see I have zigzagged most of my way all over the graph of attachment styles. If you do the same thing to your own life, if you relate from your starting point here, this slightly positive starting point, just to the above and left of the center point, the 0, 0 point, I bet you'll notice some interesting things. The thing that you really want to be aware of, though, is where are you today and where do you want to be? From there, you can begin to make some changes to your life that will either improve your perception and your sense of self-worth so that you feel much, much happier about the guy you see when you look in the mirror or the woman that you see when you look in the mirror. You also want to be able to trust other people and to trust your ability to navigate the social world without being harmed. In that way, you can build the best relationships, all of the ones that will really, really benefit your life and whose lives you can benefit as well. You want to create your own tribe, and you also want to exclude those who have very different values or who cannot respect you or who are otherwise kind of in a mess of a place where you cannot help them and they are only going to act as an anchor on you moving forward with your life. If you find yourself struggling with either of those areas, with your ability to connect socially or with how you feel about yourself, you will want to address these. Brojo has a ton of articles. There are a lot of videos on topics such as core values, on imposter syndrome, on building relationships, on social anxiety. Definitely go through those videos, go through our articles, check out the Brojo University course. We have courses specifically on how to develop your social confidence. If you feel quite stuck and really want some help solving this problem, give us a call. Both Dan and I are here to coach, and we love helping people through life situations to create the ideal life that they want. And we've pretty much devoted our own lives to this because there is nothing more satisfying than helping people get to that place where their life is just perfect. See you soon.